It's time for episode 21 of the Mystical Times blog podcast with me, Michele Eve. On this episode, I will share 3 more Timeslip experiences with you. The first experience is pretty terrifying. The second appears quite normal at first. And the third account is rather strange. All of these experiences have something in common: the weather. Does the weather have a part to play in these time slips? I'll leave that up to you to decide. And don't forget, if you've had a spooky experience, then I want to hear about it. Email me here, spooky@mysticaltimesblog.com. The terrifying time slip. This time slip happened before World War II, but I was unable to find the exact date. It happened to an undergraduate student, Arthur Threnwyn. He was spending Easter at some barracks near to Helvick Head in Ireland, and had decided on this particular evening to sleep in the open. Not long after he had fallen asleep, he woke up due to feeling cold, and a mist surrounded him. It was in total darkness that he decided to try and find shelter. He came across a light of what he thought was a cottage. He made his way to the light, and as he got closer, he discovered the light was coming from the open hatch of a boat. Arthur looked down the hatch and saw an older man who was mending a fishing net across a table. The man saw Arthur and beckoned him inside the boat. He gave Arthur a bowl of soup and said that Arthur could spend the night in the cabin at the end of the boat. The man took Arthur to the cabin and left him. Arthur had his sister's red school scarf on him, so he decided to hang it on the cabin door. As he was doing this, he heard the man walking back up the passageway. It was then that Arthur felt threatened, so he bolted the cabin door. The man was trying to open the door to the cabin while shouting,
"Open the door and let me in."
Arthur was filled with fear, so looked at how to escape and ended up smashing the skylight and fled from the boat. When he finally got back to the barracks, he told the guards and wanted them to go back to the boat in the daylight. When enough guards agreed to go with him, they made their way to where the boat was. When they got there, they all saw the boat. But it was an old wreck. But it clearly was the boat that Arthur had been on several hours before. The timbers of the boat were slimy, and there were many rats scurrying around. As they looked over the boat, Arthur found his sister's red school scarf still hanging on the cabin door. It wasn't until later on that Arthur was informed that 70 years ago, the owner of that boat was hanged for the murder of an undergraduate student, just like Arthur had been when the time slip happened. A time slip in the rain. This experience comes from the book Phenomena by R. Rickyard and J. Mitchell. For this time slip, we go to Swindon in Wiltshire, and it was in the 1930s that a Mrs. Edna Hedges was cycling along Ermine Street, which had once been a Roman road. She was off to meet a friend when the weather becomes stormy, and she had to find shelter from the torrential rain. She saw a thatched cottage just off Ermine Street and saw smoke coming from the chimney, a sign that someone was at home and in front of a fire, so she made her way to the cottage. She knocked on the door, and it was answered by a tall, bearded older man, and she asked him if she could take shelter from the storm in his cottage. He let her in, and she saw a very bright fire burning in the fireplace. She recalled that she never heard the man speak. Her memory is that she saw the fire, then found herself back on her bicycle, continuing her journey, and the storm was no longer happening. She just couldn't remember leaving the cottage, just her arrival and seeing the man and the fire. When she arrived at her friend's house, her friend was surprised to see Edna's clothes were bone dry, despite the heavy rainfall. Edna told her friend about finding shelter at the bearded man's cottage. Her friend said that there was no longer a cottage, thatched or otherwise, just off of Ermine Street, just an unused track that led to a knockdown cottage, which hadn't been lived in for over 50 years or more. Edna retraced her journey, and indeed she did find the remains of a cottage where she had found shelter. She was lost for words as she knew what had happened. Even her clothing had been dry, so just what had she experienced? A time slip at Avebury Stone Circle. It was a rainy October evening in 1916 when Edith Olivier was travelling from Devizes to Swindon in Wiltshire. Edith was said to have felt a little tired and wanted to find an inn where she could rest for a while, then continue her journey. She drove off the main road and found herself driving down an avenue which had huge megalithic upright stones. She realised she was in Avebury, where large stone megaliths were abundant. As she drove nearer the centre of Avebury, she decided to pull her car over and look at the stones. She had never been to Avebury before, but recognised the scenery from photos she had seen in the past. She stood on the high banks and could see little cottages nearby. It was then that she spotted, in between the stones, lots of people attending what seemed to be a fair. The people held flares and torches whilst they enjoyed the stalls and games at the fair. She was very surprised to see no one was wearing outer garments, despite the rain falling quite hard. She could hear the crowd shouting and laughing, whilst they were being entertained by various entertainers. The rainfall became heavier, and it was then that Edith returned to her vehicle to resume her journey. Edith wasn't to visit Avebury for another 9 years. On her return, she purchased a guidebook to Avebury, and to her surprise, read that the last time Avebury had a fair was in 1850. She told a local guide of what happened to her 9 years earlier, but only to be told she was incorrect, and that 1850 was the last year in which it had been held, so she must have been mistaken. Feeling quite perturbed by what she had heard from the local guide, she told them of how she got to where the fair was being held, an avenue of tall, upstanding megaliths, but astonishingly, she was told that this particular avenue had actually disappeared before 1800. So just what had Edith experienced? Was it a time slip, or just some ghostly experience? If it was just a ghostly experience, why would she have seen the upright megaliths? That's all for this episode, and I do hope you enjoyed hearing those time slip experiences. For the next episode, episode 22, I'll be sharing the dark history behind a ghostly photograph. Till next time.